So I watched a documentary on cowboys the other day. You heard me right, cowboys. And there's an amazing aspect to their lives that is almost the direct opposite of what our lives are like today. And it's well worth discussing. But before getting into the audio, I would just like to thank you all who listened to the first episode, which was a lot of fun. I hope you all enjoyed it. The engagement was fantastic. I'm sorry for not replying to the comments there because I'm having to run a tight ship, and I wish I could reply to 75 comments, but it's tough. I can just say that thank you all for sharing your opinions and your perspectives. Everyone has a voice, and I think it's so important to get these sort of dialogues going. Getting back to the topic of cowboys, I grew up in Southern Africa, so it's probably the furthest south you could ever get from the Americas. And I learned about cowboys, like many, watching TV series and action films. The dusty streets, the tumbleweeds, the saloons, the duels at midday. And it's crazy how different the films portrayed cowboys to how they actually lived. For those of us who don't know, it was a very simple life. These men would ride horses, and they would be responsible for cattle. They would be herding them from A to B, working under different people, and basically finding work herding cattle across the country. Even back then, they were so highly respected by people because they had such a inner strength and a reserve and the ability to handle themselves in these situations. I mean, they had hundreds to thousands of cows they had to look after, and one wrong move and these cows would stampede and everyone would be killed. So they had to be able to have the foresight to know, firstly, how to get through the terrain. There weren't roads back then. Traveling through the terrain, but at the same time being able to manage these animals and do the job correctly. So their lives were very simple. They would camp outside, they would swap stories with each other. But there's one aspect that needs to be covered about what made their lives so interesting compared to what we see nowadays. They were very much focused on owning one thing and making sure that that thing was used throughout its life. So their hats, their boots, their clothes, the whole idea of patina basically originated with them and the way they lived. And if one of these men had to go out and spend the meager salary they received on new clothing, a new jacket, new boots, new hats, they would be ridiculed by the group because of this whole lifestyle idea of living simple. And the end goal in their lives was to be able to save enough money to buy land, to buy a ranch, to keep their own cattle, to have their own farm and live on that for the rest of their lives. And they basically considered that any of this added expense of spending for the sake of spending to be ridiculous. And that leads very neatly into our modern culture today, because we see the exact opposite. I see new cars on the road every day. I see companies pushing out new products every day. And the word consumer is very much ingrained in our lives. It's almost like we have become the very epitome of the consumer as time has gone by. And it's no longer really buying and appreciating something. It's more along the lines of how can I one-up the next person with what I have. And it's a completely different world that we live in. And it's completely understandable. I mean, now we live in a time when we can afford these things, so why not treat ourselves? And then segueing into watches. And we see just how platforms like social media have perpetuated these collections and the grey market and the buying and selling of these things. Just for an example, this is what I've seen before that it's always made me raise an eyebrow. Think of a Supercase Submariner. Okay, just a standard 114060 no-date Submariner. This is in a watch box. First watch is that. Next in the box, a 116610, a date Submariner. Same case, the only difference is that it has a date. Next to it we have a Hulk Submariner. Next to that we have a black on black GMT. Then next to that we have a Batman GMT. Next to that we have a Pepsi GMT. And it just goes on and on. A Pepsi Jubilee GMT, a Batman with a Jubilee. All of these watches, to the uninitiated, are exactly the same. And even I stand there and look at these things and go, well, they're exactly the same, right? And of course, the enthusiast will be able to know the differences and know that there is one little incremental change between them. But in reality, they are the same watch. Almost exactly the same, just maybe a different movement, a bit of a different aesthetic. And you have to ask yourself, why do you have all 7 or 8 of these things in your collection when they are exactly the same watches? And you kind of think to yourself, wouldn't this person be happier having one, like the Batman on an oyster bracelet, for example, and be happy enough to have that and use that for the rest of their lives? No problem. And it's hard to know, it's hard to really give a justification why this is being done. On one side, it could be the fact that this person is a full-on enthusiast and wants to have all of them. The other side, it could be because they want to show off. Adding to that, it could be because of the watch's values nowadays and how the industry has changed. On the flip side of the argument, we look at certain watches that do maintain their value, like certain Rolex watches, Patek Philippe, Audemars Piguet. You can put your money into them and be guaranteed that they will remain the same value. But then it's not so much a collecting game anymore. It's now almost like a business in a way. And that sort of brings up more questions. But again, it's down to what you value. Are you buying these things for the sake of resale, which I am not a fan of? I know it's the way the world works and everyone wants a product they can sell to make a profit, but is that really what you want out of a watch? Modern Rolex are the easiest watches to jump to. You see these watch boxes of 12, 24 new Rolex sports watches that all look virtually the same. They all have practically the same case, the same movement, same bracelets, different colors. And that being a person's collection. And I constantly think to myself, wouldn't this person be happier just having one, using it and knowing that's all they need? The beauty about what I've been doing, writing about the art and design of watches, is the more I've been able to do it, the more I've been able to take my heart out of it, so to speak, and look at them objectively. And I said in the last recording, similar to how a art critic looks at a painting and sort of appreciates the elements that it pays homage to, the elements that work, the elements that don't, questioning the reason why these approaches were taken. But more than that, writing about these things has sort of pushed me in a direction where I don't need to own it anymore. So being able to write about these things on a daily basis sort of teaches me about what I like and what I don't like. I'm sort of honing my perspective down to a point where I'll be able to pinpoint and say, that's the watch I want. That's what I'll have for the rest of my life, and that's it. Sign off. And I think there's something quite empowering in that. I was spending time on an email the other day discussing the difficulty of choice and how hard it is to really come up with a final answer on a watch. And it is difficult, especially when someone wants to spend money on one watch and have that be their anniversary piece, for example. And like I've said many times, instead of just going out and buying 10 of them, why not really spend a good 6 months honing in on what you want and why you want it, coming up with a good reasoning why this is the piece for you. So again, just on reflection, again, looking back at that time and where we are now, fascinating to see how the world has changed, how people are aspiring to have more and more and more, where 100, 200 years ago, life was very different and you were viewed very differently as an individual by what you were able to keep and what was able to last. So it's an interesting story, and it's one well worth debating. And I hope you took something away from this. I've been told many times in my life to hold lightly to the things of this earth, because once again, procuring these objects, we're not taking them with us one day. And you have to ask yourself, is it necessary? Are you doing this for the right reason, or are you doing this just for the sake of your pleasure that is not inherently important in the bigger picture? So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for listening, and see you in the next one.